I spent 2 weeks preparing that family dinner. 2 weeks of researching recipes, buying ingredients, and practicing techniques to impress my wife Sophia's relatives. Standing in our kitchen, watching 14 family members take their seats around our extended dining table, I felt hopeful. This was my chance to finally earn their respect. But then James slapped my back hard and announced, "Every family needs a punchline. Thanks for making the rest of us look like winners." My 16-year-old daughter Lily nearly choked on her drink laughing. "Dad's like a wet paper towel," she added. Sophia just smirked and said, "Honestly, he's more like a Roomba, quiet, programmable, and only useful when there's a mess." They all laughed while I smiled. Before I tell you how I flipped the script on my so-called family drop, a comment letting me know if you've ever been the butt of family jokes. Hit subscribe if you're ready to hear how sometimes the quietest person becomes the strongest. The disparity between my background and my wife's family had always been apparent. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Minneapolis, the son of a mechanic and a nurse who worked overtime to put me through college. When I met Sophia during my final year at the University of Minnesota, I was immediately drawn to her intelligence and ambition. What I did not fully comprehend was how different our worlds were. Sophia came from old money. Her father, Harold, had built a successful investment firm that her brother James now helped run. Their family home in Wayzata overlooked Lake Minnetonka with a boathouse larger than my first apartment. While I chose to become a high school English teacher because I believed in the power of literature to transform lives, Sophia pursued a career in corporate law and eventually became an executive at a multinational company. During our 8 years of marriage, the status gap between us had only widened. My salary as a dedicated educator barely increased, while Sophia's compensation package grew exponentially. We lived in a house her parents helped us purchase in an upscale neighborhood where I never quite felt at home. The subtle undermining began about 3 years into our marriage. At first, it was just James making casual remarks about teacher salaries during family gatherings. "Must be nice having summers off since you cannot afford real vacations," he once said loudly enough for everyone to hear at a 4th of July barbecue. I brushed it off as his particular brand of humor. Then came the backhanded compliments from my mother-in-law, Eleanor. "Raul, this casserole is surprisingly good for someone who grew up on. What did you call those Mexican dishes your mother made?" The fact that I was actually of Guatemalan descent never seemed to register with her despite my numerous gentle corrections. What hurt most was watching Sophia's loyalty gradually shift. Early in our relationship, she would defend me, telling her family to knock it off. Somewhere along the way, she began laughing along instead. The final betrayal was when she started joining in, making me the target of jokes rather than her partner in life. My daughter Lily, now 16, had naturally absorbed the family's values. She attended an expensive private school courtesy of her grandparents and spent weekends at the country club with her cousins. I tried to instill in her the importance of compassion and the value of hard work, but the allure of her mother's lifestyle was powerful. I watched her transform from a sweet girl who once made me world's best dad cards into a teenager who rolled her eyes when I talked about my students' achievements. That infamous dinner had been my attempt to change the narrative. I spent nearly my entire monthly paycheck on premium ingredients, grass-fed beef for the Wellington organic vegetables from the farmer's market, and an absurdly expensive bottle of Cabernet that Harold had once mentioned in the Haya. Passing. I took a cooking class specifically to learn how to make the perfect crème brûlée, Sophia's favorite dessert. For 14 days, I researched everyone's dietary preferences and restrictions. James's wife did not eat gluten. Eleanor was trying a Mediterranean diet. Sophia's cousin was newly vegan. I created a menu that would accommodate everyone while still feeling cohesive. The night before, I stayed up until 2 in the morning, prepping everything I could. After teaching a full day of sophomore English classes, I rushed home to finish cooking. By the time guests arrived, I was exhausted but hopeful. This dinner would be the turning point. Everyone seemed impressed initially. The table setting looked elegant. The appetizers disappeared quickly. For a moment, I thought I had succeeded. Then came the main course. James took a bite of the beef Wellington and made a show of chewing thoughtfully before delivering his verdict. A little overdone, but not bad for amateur night. His 3 sons snickered. Harold at least had the decency to compliment the wine. "Good bottle," he said with a nod. "I have a case of the 2015 vintage in my cellar. Much better year." I maintained my composure, serving course after course while absorbing small criticisms and faint praise. When I finally sat down to eat my own now cold meal, I noticed Sophia's cousin taking photos of the food but purposely framing me out of the shots. That was when James delivered the line that would change everything. He stood up as if making a toast, slapped my back hard enough to make me jolt forward, and loudly proclaimed, "Every family needs a punchline. Thanks for making the rest of us look like winners." I froze fork midway to my mouth as my own. Daughter nearly choked on her sparkling water from laughing so hard. "Dad's like a wet paper towel," Lily added, high-fiving her uncle. The final blow came from my wife. Sophia leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine with a manicured finger, and said with a smirk, "Honestly, he's more like a Roomba. Quiet, programmable, and only useful when there's a mess." The table erupted in laughter. Even Harold, who usually maintained a dignified reserve, chuckled behind his napkin. I looked around at these people, my family by law, if not by love, and forced myself to smile. Inside, something cracked that would never be repaired. After the dinner, everyone filed out with minimal offers to help clean up. James clapped me on the shoulder as he left, saying, "Same time next month, Roomba." His sons mimicked the sound of a vacuum cleaner as they followed their father out. I spent an hour scrubbing dishes and loading the dishwasher while Sophia chatted on the phone with her mother in the living room. When she finally came into the kitchen, she seemed surprised to find me still cleaning. "You should have left this for tomorrow," she said, leaning against the counter. "It's late." "Would a Roomba wait until tomorrow?" I replied, my voice deliberately neutral. Sophia rolled her eyes. "Come on, Raoul. It was just a joke. You know how James gets after a few glasses of wine." And Lily, was she also just joking when she compared me to a wet paper towel? Teenagers say thoughtless things. You know that better than anyone. You teach them all day. "And you," I finally looked directly at her. "Were you joking too?" Sophia sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "You're being too sensitive. My family teases each other all the time. It means they're comfortable with you. Comfortable enough to humiliate me after I spent 2 weeks planning and cooking for them. You're blowing this out of proportion." She pushed away from the counter. "I'm going to bed." That night I slept on the couch for the first time in our marriage. Not because she asked me to, but because I could not bear to lie next to someone who saw my pain and dismissed it so easily. The next morning, Lily found me making coffee in the kitchen. Her eyes widened slightly at my rumpled appearance. "Why are you sleeping on the couch? Did you and Mom fight?" Before I could answer, Sophia entered the kitchen already dressed for work in a tailored suit. "Your father is upset about some jokes at dinner last night." Lily rolled her eyes in a perfect imitation of her mother. "Seriously, Dad, Uncle James teases everyone." "Even you?" I asked quietly. "What does Uncle James make jokes about you being useless? Does Grandma Eleanor make comments about your clothes or your friends or your hobbies? Has your mother ever compared you to a household appliance in front of the entire family?" Lily looked uncomfortable. "That's different." How Sophia intervened. "Enough, Raoul. You're making this weird for everyone. Just get over it." As they gathered their things to leave, Sophia for work, Lily for school, I noticed my wife's phone on the counter. It buzzed with an incoming message, the screen lighting up to show a group chat named Family Minus Roomba. Sophia rushed back and snatched it up, but not before I glimpsed James's message. "Think he's still cleaning up, lol." That moment crystallized something I had been feeling for years. I was not part of this family. I was their convenient target, their shared joke, the outsider they united against. The week that followed was unbearably tense at home. Sophia worked late most nights, and Lily spent the weekend at her grandparents' lake house. I threw myself into teaching, staying at school long after classes ended to grade papers and plan lessons. My colleague Alan noticed something was wrong when I declined his invitation to grab a beer after work on Friday, something that had become our small tradition. "You okay, man? You seem off lately," he said, leaning against my classroom doorway. "Just tired," I replied, not looking up from the essays I was grading. Alan closed the door and pulled up a student chair opposite my desk. "Cut the crap, Raoul. I've known you for 6 years. Something's wrong." Maybe it was his direct approach, or maybe I just needed to tell someone, but I found myself explaining the dinner disaster and everything that had led up to it. Alan listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You know this isn't normal, right? What they're doing is emotional abuse." I flinched at the term. "They're just joking around." "No," Alan said firmly. "They're not. And the fact that you're defending their behavior shows how deep this goes." He then shared something I had never known. That he had left his first marriage because his ex-wife and her family had treated him similarly, gradually eroding his self-esteem until he barely recognized himself. The moment everything changed for me was when I realized that respect isn't earned by constantly trying to please people who enjoy watching you fail. It's established by setting boundaries and being willing to walk away when those boundaries are crossed. His words stayed with me throughout the weekend. I thought about boundaries and self-respect as I walked through our empty house, passing family photos that suddenly seemed like propaganda for a happy life that did not exist. The following Wednesday, I arrived home early from school after a faculty meeting was canceled. As I entered through the garage, I heard voices from the kitchen, Sophia and James. I paused in the hallway, not deliberately eavesdropping, but caught by the mention of my name. "Raoul does not need to know yet," Sophia was saying. "We can tell him after everything is finalized. He's going to find out eventually that we're all going to Aspen for Christmas," James replied. "Harold already put the deposit down on the chalet. I will handle Raoul. Maybe he can stay home and clean the house, like a good Roomba." Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. My daughter's laughter. Lily was there too, complicit in this secret planning, amused by the continued mockery of her father. I must have made a noise because the conversation stopped abruptly. When I walked into the kitchen, 3 faces turned to me with varying degrees of guilt and defiance. "How long have you been standing there?" Sophia asked. "Long enough," I answered, surprised by the steadiness of my voice, despite the fact that my chest felt so tight I could barely breathe. James recovered first, his practiced charm sliding into place. "We were just discussing holiday plans, brother-in-law. The whole family's thinking of hitting the slopes this Christmas. The whole family except me, apparently." Sophia shot James an irritated look before turning to me with a placating smile. "We were going to talk about it tonight. Nothing's been decided." "Stop lying to me." My voice was quiet but firm. "All of you just stop." Lily looked down at her phone, suddenly fascinated by its screen. James cleared his throat awkwardly. Sophia's smile faltered. "I need some air," I said, turning to leave. No one tried to stop me. I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually parking near a small lake where Lily and I used to feed ducks when she was little. Sitting on a bench as darkness fell, I pulled out my wallet and extracted a worn photograph of my parents on their 30th anniversary. My father, who had worked with his hands his entire life, had always told me, "Your worth isn't in what you own or what others think of you. It's in how you treat people and whether you can look yourself in the mirror each morning." I had not been able to look myself in the mirror for a long time. Somewhere along the way, I had surrendered my dignity in exchange for crumbs of approval that never came. As the stars appeared over the lake, I made a decision. Things were going to change. Beginning tonight. My transformation did not happen overnight. It began with small, deliberate steps, each one strengthening my resolve for the next. The morning after overhearing the Aspen conversation, I called in sick to school, something I had done only twice in my teaching career. Instead of going to work, I met with Frank Donovan, a financial advisor Alan had recommended. I brought copies of our joint bank statements, investment accounts, and property documents. "I'm not necessarily planning for divorce," I explained. "I just need to understand exactly where I stand financially." Frank's review revealed several concerning issues. While our house was jointly owned, Sophia had taken out a second mortgage without my knowledge to invest in her brother's business venture. She had also accumulated significant credit card debt that I knew nothing about despite our agreement to discuss any purchases over $500. Your wife has been less than transparent about your joint finances, Frank said carefully. I would strongly recommend separate accounts going forward regardless of what you decide about the marriage. My next stop was to see Teresa Yang, an attorney friend who had taught a few guest lectures on copyright law for my creative writing elective. When I explained my situation, she agreed to give me some preliminary advice. Document everything she advised. Dates, times, exact wording of comments or conversations. Michigan is a one-party consent state for recording, so you can legally record conversations you're part of without telling the other person. She helped me draft a document outlining my boundaries and expectations, essentially a roadmap for how I needed to be treated if our marriage was to continue. That afternoon, I went to the bank and opened an individual account, transferring half of our joint savings into it. I was careful to document every transaction and leave the other half untouched. Fair but firm, as Teresa had advised. Over the next week, I implemented other changes. I joined a gym with Alan, focusing on strength training not just for my body but for my mind. After years of Sophia criticizing my teacher clothes, I used some of my protected funds to buy new outfits that made me feel confident. I reconnected with friends Sophia had deemed not our social circle. Other teachers, my college roommate who had become a firefighter, my cousin who ran a food truck. These were genuine people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide or how I made them look. The most significant professional change came when I launched a side business tutoring advanced literature for college entrance exams. I had always declined such opportunities, believing my time was better spent supporting Sophia's career and trying to connect with Lily. Now, I recognized that having my own financial independence and professional identity beyond the classroom was essential. Sophia noticed these changes but said little. She seemed wary, perhaps sensing that the ground beneath our relationship had shifted. Lily was more direct, asking why I was not home as much in the evenings. I'm investing in myself, I told her simply. Is this because of what Uncle James said? Are you still upset about that? This isn't about one comment, Lily. It's about years of disrespect that I've allowed to continue. I'm making changes because I deserve better. She looked genuinely confused, but it was just joking around. Would you let someone talk to your best friend the way your mother's family talks to me? Her silence was answer enough. After 3 weeks of preparation, I was ready for the confrontation that needed to happen. I texted Sophia asking her to ensure she and Lily would be home for dinner on Friday. We need to talk as a family, I wrote. She responded with a simple, okay, probably assuming I wanted to apologize for my recent distance. I prepared a simple meal, nothing elaborate like the disastrous family dinner, and set the table for 3. When they arrived home, both looked surprised to find me waiting calmly. Sit down, please, I said. There's something important we need to discuss. Once seated, I placed a folder on the table. For the past 8 years, I have tried to earn the respect and acceptance of this family. I've cooked, cleaned, compromised, and consumed myself with being what everyone else wanted. In return, I've been mocked, excluded, and treated as less than. Sophia began to interrupt, but I held up my hand. Please let me finish. I have listened to both of you and your extended family for years. You can give me 10 minutes of uninterrupted time. I opened the folder and removed printed screenshots of text messages from the family-Roomba chat that I had accessed through Sophia's iPad. Messages that clearly showed the pattern of mockery behind my back. This stops today, I continued. I've outlined what needs to change if we're going to move forward as a family. I presented them with the boundary document Teresa had helped me create. It included specific examples of unacceptable behavior, clear consequences, if those behaviors continued, and requirements for family therapy. I've also discovered some financial issues that concern me, I said, turning to Sophia. The second mortgage on our house. The credit cards, I knew nothing about. James's business investment. Sophia's face paled. How did you find out about those? That's your response. Not an explanation or an apology, but surprise that I discovered the truth. Lily looked between us, confusion and alarm crossing her face. Mom, what is he talking about? I continued before Sophia could deflect. I've opened my own bank account and transferred my fair share of our joint savings. I'm not trying to punish either of you. I'm establishing that I value myself even if you don't. So you're leaving us? Lily's voice cracked suddenly, sounding much younger than her 16 years. I'm taking 2 weeks away to give us all space to think. I'll be staying at Alan's guest house. During that time, I expect both of you to read this document carefully and decide if you're willing to make these changes. Sophia finally found her voice. You cannot just dictate terms to us like this. I'm not dictating anything. I'm telling you what I need to be healthy in this relationship. You're free to decide if you want to meet those needs or if you'd prefer I file for divorce. The word hung in the air between us. I had never spoken it aloud before. I stood up, revealing the packed duffel bag beside my chair. I'll contact you in 2 weeks. Until then, I need you both to respect my space. Dad, wait, Lily began, but I was already walking to the door. 2 weeks, I repeated. I love you both, but I need to love myself too. As I drove away, my hands were steady on the wheel. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The transformation continued during my time at Alan's. I attended 3 sessions with a therapist who specialized in emotional abuse recovery. I went hiking in state parks I had always wanted to visit. I prepared for parent-teacher conferences with a new sense of purpose and pride in my profession. Most surprisingly, I received an email from the headmaster of Westridge Academy, an elite private school known for its literature program. Apparently, one of my former students now attended there and had mentioned my teaching impact during a college counseling session. They wanted to discuss a potential position for the following academic year, with nearly double my current salary. As the 2-week mark approached, I felt centered and clear. Whatever happened next, I would face it with dignity and self-respect. I was preparing dinner in Alan's kitchen when my phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Grandma Eleanor and Mom are at our house crying. Something about Uncle James and money. Mom keeps saying she needs to talk to you. I thanked her for the information, but maintained my boundary. I'll contact you both tomorrow as planned. The next morning, I drove back to my house to find Sophia's car and her mother's luxury SUV in the driveway. When I knocked on my own front door, it opened immediately to reveal my wife and mother-in-law, both with red-rimmed eyes. Raoul Eleanor began her usual imperious tone, replaced by something almost humble. We need to talk. I invited them to sit in the living room, maintaining a calm demeanor despite their obvious distress. I'm listening, I said, choosing an armchair rather than joining Sophia on the couch. Eleanor spoke first, her hands twisting an expensive handkerchief. James's business is failing. He made some high-risk investments that did not pan out. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied sincerely. But I don't see how that concerns me. He needed a loan, Sophia admitted. A substantial one. He asked me to co-sign using our house as collateral. I raised an eyebrow. And I told him no, Sophia said quietly. For the first time ever, I told my brother no. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes. Harold and I cannot cover his losses this time. The business was already struggling when he convinced Sophia to invest last year. This explained the second mortgage I had discovered. Again, I sympathize. But this seems like a family financial issue. You are family, Eleanor said, surprising me. At least I hope you still consider yourself part of this family. Sophia leaned forward. After you left, Lily and I had some long conversations. She showed me screenshots of texts from her friends about how they've noticed she treats you differently from how other kids treat their dads. Your daughter has been doing some growing up, Eleanor added. She stood up to James last Sunday when he made a comment about your absence. This was unexpected. What did she say? Sophia almost smiled. She told him that unlike some people, her father actually stands behind his words and does what he believes is right. I allowed myself a moment to appreciate this small victory before refocusing. I appreciate you sharing this, but I was very clear about needing 2 weeks. We know, Eleanor said, her voice uncharacteristically humble. And we wouldn't have come if it wasn't important. James is threatening to sue Sophia for backing out of some verbal agreement. We need your help. I considered this carefully. I'm not a lawyer. But you know one, Sophia said. Teresa Yang. Lily mentioned you've been talking to her. And we need someone level-headed right now, Eleanor added. Harold is furious with James. James is desperate, and everything's falling apart. I studied these two women who had participated in belittling me for years now, sitting in my living room asking for help. There was a certain symmetry to the situation that wasn't lost on me. I'll help on 3 conditions, I said finally. First, we begin family therapy immediately. Not just the 3 of us, but including sessions with the extended family. Second, complete financial transparency between Sophia and me going forward. And third, I want a sincere apology from everyone who participated in the Family minus Roomba chat. Sophia nodded without hesitation. Yes, to all 3. Eleanor looked less comfortable but nodded as well. I'll speak to Harold and the others. Then I'll call Teresa and see what advice she can offer about James's threats. As we began working through the practical next steps, Lily arrived home from school. She hesitated in the doorway, clearly surprised to see all 3 of us talking civilly. Dad, you're back. We're having an important family discussion, I said. Would you like to join us? The look of relief on her face was worth everything I had gone through. She sat beside me on the arm of my chair, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a small gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. The following weeks brought significant changes. Teresa helped draft a formal response to James, effectively neutralizing his threats. With her guidance, we also created a financial recovery plan that protected our assets while offering James a structured way to repay his debts without destroying family relationships. Family therapy was challenging but necessary. During our second session, Sophia broke down while describing how she had gradually adopted her family's dismissive attitude toward me. I was so afraid of being the outsider that I made Raoul into one instead. Harold, who had always been quietly complicit, finally spoke up during a joint session with the extended family. We have not honored the man our daughter married, he admitted. We valued the wrong things and taught our children to do the same. James was the last holdout, maintaining that everyone was overreacting to a few harmless jokes. It wasn't until his oldest son pointed out, "But they weren't funny, Dad. They were just mean," that something seemed to shift in his perspective. 6 months after that fateful dinner, we hosted another family gathering, this time with very different dynamics. Sophia and I prepared the meal together. Lily set the table and created place cards with thoughtful quotes about family and respect. When James attempted to make a comment about my new job offer from Westridge Academy, finally escaping the public school prison, Sophia immediately intervened. My husband is an exceptional educator who has impacted hundreds of lives, she said firmly. Westridge is lucky to have him. James looked startled, then gave a slight nod. You're right. Congratulations, Raoul. Later that month, Lily asked me to speak at her school's career day. As I stood before her classmates discussing the power of literature and education, I caught her watching me with something I hadn't seen in years: pride. My dad taught me that real strength isn't about putting others down to raise yourself up, she told her friend afterward, unaware I could hear. It's about knowing your worth and setting boundaries. The healing process wasn't linear. Sophia and I continued couples counseling, working through years of accumulated hurt and rebuilding trust. There were difficult conversations about her family's influence on our marriage and my responsibility in allowing the disrespect to continue for so long. Lily and I established a weekly father-daughter lunch where we could talk openly about anything. During one of these lunches, she asked a question that caught me off guard. Were you really going to divorce Mom? I was prepared to, I answered honestly. Not because I stopped loving her, but because sometimes loving yourself requires difficult choices. She considered this thoughtfully. I'm glad you didn't have to make that choice. Me too, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. My relationship with the extended family gradually improved as well. Eleanor began asking genuinely interested questions about my teaching and writing. Harold invited me to join him for occasional fishing trips, where we had conversations that went deeper than stock prices or real estate values. Even James showed signs of growth. When his middle son expressed interest in becoming a teacher, James called me to ask about introducing the boy to some of my colleagues, a small gesture that acknowledged the value of my profession and connections. As the one-year anniversary of the infamous dinner approached, we decided to reclaim the date with a new tradition. This time, everyone contributed to the meal. James marinated steaks. Harold made his mother's potato salad recipe. Eleanor and Sophia prepared sides. Lily baked dessert. I coordinated the whole affair but allowed others to take ownership of their contributions. As we gathered around the table, the laughter was genuine rather than at anyone's expense. When James raised his glass for a toast, I felt a momentary tension until he spoke. To Raoul, he said simply, "For teaching us that family isn't about who fits some arbitrary mold, but about respecting each person's unique gifts. You're a better man than I gave you credit for being." Later that evening, as Sophia and I washed dishes side by side, she asked, "Are you happy, Raoul?" I thought about the journey of the past year. The pain, the growth, the rebuilding of relationships on healthier foundations. I thought about my new teaching position, my tutoring business, and the short story I had finally found time to write and submit to a literary journal. "I'm at peace," I answered, which was something better and more lasting than simple happiness. I know who I am and what I deserve. That makes all the difference. As I dried my hands and hung up the towel, I caught my reflection in the window above the sink. For the first time in years, I could look myself in the eyes without shame or regret. The man looking back at me stood tall, secure in the knowledge that respect begins with self. Have you ever had to take a stand against family members who took you for granted? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding your voice and setting healthy boundaries. Remember, sometimes walking away is the only way others see your true worth. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to demand the respect you deserve in every relationship.